Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Banish, and welcome to Global News at 6, where we discuss the hot button issues that could affect you. Today's topic is going to be water privatization, which is when the control of the water supply is taken out of the hands of the government and put in the hands of private corporations. Now, the issue currently being discussed is whether privatizing water supplies will have an impact on water sustainability, which is the ability to use water at a rate that can sustain populations for generations to come. Now, sustainability has become a generally growing problem as scarcity is increasing and water quality is decreasing. The question is, does the privatization of water truly impact the ability to sustain the water supply? Now, why don't we meet today's panelists? A Democratic senator from the state of Illinois, please welcome Senator Sarah Lohr. Sarah, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
A professor of environmental studies at Brown University, please welcome Dana Kirkgard. Dana, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
An executive water specialist from the World Bank, please welcome Patty Morava. Patty, thanks for coming.
Pleasure's all mine, Andrew.
And finally, a CEO of one of the largest American privatized water companies, American Water, please welcome Kyle Lewis. Kyle, thanks for coming to it. Our first question here is, how does privatizing water affect the price of water?
Well, Andrew, often if there's scarcity, as there is in water, prices will accordingly rise, which will negatively affect members of a lower socioeconomic status, and this is often what we see in the privatization industry.
So, Dana, you're actually thinking short term. What I'm thinking as part of the World Bank is long term. Privatization, which is a method of reallocating assets and functions from the public sector to the private sector, is actually a factor in the quest for economic long-term growth. It can also be an effective way to bring about fundamental structural changes by formalizing and establishing water as a property right. Property rights lead to strong incentives, which can lead to an increase in investment since people are certain and secure about the ownership of their property. Along with creating strong incentives that induce productivity, privatization may also improve efficiency, provide fiscal relief, encourage wider ownership, and increase the availability of credit for the private sector.
If we're actually talking about fiscal relief, investor-owned utilities typically charge 33% more for water and 63% more for sewer services than local government utilities.
What we do have to look at is that the private sector has much more to offer when looking at the overall services offered.
You know, I'm going to disagree with you because the fact of the matter is that when water becomes private, the private water companies are going to be the ones to determine the cost of it. The greedy water companies will drive up the prices, and as a public official, I was voted in to protect the rights of the population, and it's obvious that a large portion of our population will not be able to afford a basic necessity of life.
And actually, Sarah, that's correct. In a review that Food and Water Watch, which is a nonprofit organization that deals with privatization of water, they conducted a research study of 18 municipalities that ended their contracts with private water companies, and they found that the public operation averaged 21% cheaper than the private operation.
Very controversial topic here today, and price-wise, I'm so far inclined to agree with Professor Kirkgard and Senator Lohr. Next question. Now, in terms of the ability to obtain water, does privatization increase or decrease accessibility?
World Bank officials and I argue that increased cost recovery and privatization will actually expand access to clean water and sanitation. Where public delivery fails, we support private entry. We advise and assist countries in developing regulatory frameworks and in designing clean transactions for investors and consumers in their interests, while recognizing the needs of the poor.
Well, Patricia, I'm glad that you finally recognize the needs of the poor, because this is a major problem that in the idea of water privatization. This means that individual access to water will depend on these corporations. How people get their water, how much it will cost, and the quality of the water will be set by these private corporations with very little individual concern.
And quite frankly, the higher the price of the water, the less access people will have to it. And to combat this, there's currently 18 government agencies who are dedicated to solving the current water crisis. Talking about water privatization is like talking about privatizing air. You can't do it because you can't take away someone's, something that someone needs to survive.
Privatizing water will only help the access people have to clean and healthy water. For example, Nestle has been given authority by Aurora City, Colorado, to extract 650 million gallons of water from the Arkansas River over the next 10 years. This water supply will all be bottled and sold throughout the United States.
Well, actually, private corporations are prone to cherry picking services And this means they pick areas that to avoid serving low-income communities where low water use and frequent bill collection is a problem and can hurt public profits.
The current water crisis and the problem with access to water is a health crisis, it's a farming crisis, it's an economic crisis, it's a climate crisis, and increasingly, it's a social justice crisis.
Things are starting to get heated here today. Why don't we move on to the next topic? How does the privatization of water affect the quality?
Well, research has shown that water quality issues can be directly related to poor infrastructure. Water pipelines generally are not reachable throughout community members in less developed countries. I'd like to argue that with higher payments from consumers, private companies will have an incentive, as well as the revenues, to extend pipelines to those relying on water trucks or unclean sources, all benefiting the quality of water that communities receive. Governments can play an important quality assurance role also by monitoring and evaluating the delivery of privatized services.
However, these private companies do not have to disclose as much information as public companies have to. Their main concern is answering to their board of directors and their stockholders, not to the general public, who are the ones who will ultimately be consuming the water.
Exactly what Sarah said. Multinational water corporations are loyal to their stockholders and not to the public they serve, and this inevitably leads to transparency issues and public accountability.
What we have to look at is that the privatization of water creates a heightened quality of water. We have the technology and resources to make sure that the quality of our water will be safe for all who drink it. Without the technology and resources of American Water and other private companies, there is no guarantee that the water you are drinking will be the quality that we guarantee.
Exactly.
Like privatizing water will certainly increase the quality of the water, but guys, how will it affect the environment?
Well, actually, Andrew, private facilities often produce much more pollution than government-owned facilities, and this is because there's an emphasis on profit rather than human responsibility. The production plants alone produce waste that fills agricultural fields with contamination, pollutes underground wells and canals, and we just can't tolerate this.
Well, in regards to that, we are currently working hand in hand with the EPA to make sure that all of our production is environmentally safe. The EPA brings in people to test our product before American Water has a chance to sell off any of their product to other companies. By having the EPA come in and check our production, it shows that we are doing everything in our power to keep the environment as safe as possible.
And an additional point I'd like to make is that the public sector provides water waste as well. They typically lose 40 to 50% of their volumes through leaks and theft, all of which contaminates our environment. Thus, privatization of water does not result in negative environmental impacts. There's other factors that we need to think about and stop blaming water privatization and all these environmental issues we're facing currently.
I would disagree with that statement because private companies have negatively affected the environment in the past. For example, this happened in 2004 when Coca-Cola began pumping 1.5 million liters of water from reserves every day in a town in India. Coca-Cola depleted this town's water supply and has since had further detrimental effects to the community as a whole. It has affected agriculture and therefore the economy as well, and we won't take that risk.
Sarah, that's a great example. I also want to bring up, I know you touched on Nestle earlier in the bottled water that will be distributed around America, but given the fact that only 23% of plastics that are petroleum-based are recycled, the nation will be littered with more and more bottles that will end up in landfills, our oceans, roadsides, and it ultimately releases toxins into the environment.
I thank our panelists today, Senator Lohr, Professor Kirkgard, Executive Specialist Morava, and Mr. Lewis. Guys, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
There are a lot of factors that play into the privatization of water, those being the price, the quality, the accessibility, and the impact on the environment. I'm Andrew Banish. Tune in next week, same time, same place, Global News at 6. Good night, everybody.